being able to kind of turn sewing into an art. Not that garment sewing isn't, it totally is, but I don't know, I felt like I could express myself through quilts in ways that were new to me. I was super excited about that.
A movement is underway of people abandoning the emotional, physical, and financial expenses of city living and crafting their own purpose, livelihoods, and joy in the rural reaches. The Urban Exodus podcast shares the wisdom, wit, and stories of those who decided to embark on the road less traveled to pursue their own interpretation of the good life. Small business owners, change makers, artists, farmers, and more, working towards building a better future for themselves and their fellow citizens. This podcast is for country dreamers, rural folk, and urban dwellers alike who want to feel more connected to the natural world and the purpose and choices in their lives. I'm Melissa Hessler. Welcome to the Urban Exodus. I'm excited to invite you to my conversation with Sara Buscaglia, the artist and farmer behind Farm and Folk and Ancient Future Farm, located in the high desert region of Colorado. Sara and her partner both grew up in the suburbs of Chicago and Detroit. Before meeting and falling in love in Durango, neither had any farming experience. They cut their farming teeth on land lended to them by a friend. For 7 years, they built their local customer base and saved money for their own land. When not farming and homeschooling her 4 children, Sara is a textile artist, making plant-dyed clothing and exquisite handmade quilts. Sara Buscaglia, it is such a pleasure to have you on the podcast. I have followed you online for so long, followed your quilting journey, your farming journey, and I'm really inspired by the life that you and your family are building out in Colorado. And first off, I'd just love to hear a little bit of your backstory, where you grew up, how you met your partner, and how you ended up there in Colorado.
Thanks so much for having me. It's so nice to be here. Yeah, so we both grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in the suburbs of Detroit, and he grew up in the suburbs of Chicago. Like, neither one of us really had any sort of rural aspect of our upbringing at all. And then we both ended up moving out to Durango for college, and he went to Fort Lewis for a couple of years. I went to a couple different colleges in the Midwest and kept transferring. I just couldn't find my happy place, and then ended up transferring out to Durango. And once I got here, I only went to college here for like 4 days before I called it quits. But then we met shortly after that here in Durango, just randomly. And we started living together within a few months and moved to a place out in the country. And that was my first time ever, probably both of our first time ever living rurally. And we grew like a tiny garden at that first house that we were renting. And it wasn't huge. I can't even really remember how big it was, but it was like these terraces that we built, and we used rocks and stuff and built these terraces. And it was like my first time ever experiencing certain vegetables. Like, I had never heard of kale or chard, or like I had only eaten beets out of cans and stuff growing up, and I thought they were gross. But, you know, like, growing those for the first time was like revolutionary. And it changed the way we ate and the way we thought. And I don't know. So that was just one summer that we were out there, and it kindled this love of gardening and a closeness, you know, to like the earth. And that was kind of like the magic that made us realize that we wanted to go farther with gardening and with farming. So it just sort of happened, because we didn't really know what we were going to do at that point in our lives. But we decided to go for it. The next summer we moved out to Oxford, which is like totally the desert. I don't know how we moved out there because it's cheaper. It's like way more rural. It was like 30 minutes from town. So it was cheaper to live out there, but it was super desert, and we grew a bigger garden out there, but it was off a well. And in the West, like it just doesn't really, where we live here, it doesn't really ever rain. So to like garden off a well like that is actually a terrible idea. But we did it somehow. And that summer we ended up with an excess of produce. And we had a couple friends that were doing the farmers market. And at one of the last farmers markets, we had all these melons and all this stuff. And so our friends invited us to just like bring whatever excess produce we had to the farmers market and sell it there. And that's when we were like, oh, this is what we want to do.
You got your start for 7 years on this land that he essentially kind of gave to you guys to just like build your farming career. Is that where you are now? Is that where you landed permanently, or did you find another land after that?
No. So after that, one day, Tommy showed up there in the fall to plant the garlic. By this time, we had three little boys, little ones, like between the ages of 5 and 1. And he showed up there one day to plant the garlic, and Jock was the owner of the land. He was like a super new age kind of groovy guy. He was like a hippie in Berkeley in the 60s, and he was a great guy. Love him. But Tommy showed up to plant the garlic, and he's out there on the tiller tilling up the land to get the garlic in. And I was happy. I was like, oh no, this is going to be like our time, like this is our time to find a farm for ourselves. We had been able to save up enough money to put down a small down payment through those 7 years of him letting us farm there for free and just living really frugally. We had a really rundown rental house that we'd been living in for 5 years at that point. It was really cheap and it was a pretty awful place, but that's how we were able to save up our money. We just kind of stuck to it and knew that something would come of it. And it was off the main river in town, which is the Animus, which is, I don't know if you heard, but one of the mines were released by the EPA. They were trying to clean it out a few years ago. And
it's the Yellow River, right?
It's the Yellow River, yeah.
Yeah, so, my husband's actually doing a water project, like a fine art photography project on water quality. And he was in your hood then because he has photographs of that river. Yeah.
We did get all the ditches turned off before all that toxic waste went into our irrigation ditches, and we lost our water for most of the rest of the season. But yeah, that's like one thing that we deal with. Anyways, it's a really reliable river as far as the amount of water that comes through. So living in the West, irrigation water is the only way that you can really farm. So when we bought this place, the reason we decided on this one was because it had great irrigation rights. The house was terrible, we had to take it apart bit by bit over the last 15, 16 years. That's what we've done. But we bought the place for the water.
That's actually good advice for people, right, that are thinking about farming or planting roots. Water is such a crucial element, like you said, in the West especially, and not just access, but rights for long term. Mm-hmm. Can you describe your farm and land there in Colorado and kind of the challenges and benefits of living where you do as farmers?
This place that we ended up on that we call a farm now because we've made it a farm, it wasn't actually a farm when we bought it. So land in the West is super expensive. You can't really just go out and buy a big farm. We couldn't, but so it's like these 3-acre parcels. So it's kind of like we kind of sort of live in a neighborhood. Our neighbors aren't all that far from us. We're all 3 acres apart from each other. And when we bought the place, Tommy rented a tractor the day we closed on it. So from the minute we left signing all the papers at the closing, he went and picked up a tractor that he rented to till up the field and break ground that day to get potatoes in. So all these neighbors were so interested in what was going on here. They were like, what in the heck are you guys doing? You can't garden down here. It's too cold. Nobody can do it. We've all tried. We had several people say that to us, and we were like, oh no, we can do it. We are down in the river valley, so it is cooler. It was significantly cooler down here than it was at the farm that was just 7 miles up the road where we had farmed for 7 years. And that was like shocking, just the difference in temperature and stuff. But we were able to make it work. The neighbors were amused by it all.
Farming in Colorado is very difficult because, like you said, there are all of these microclimates and the weather can shift from below freezing to really, really hot in just, even in a day, really.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. We've seen like 50-degree temperature fluctuations from being 97 in the day and then being 50 degrees at night. We're in the high desert, so that's like normal for those kind of temperature fluctuations to happen. Yeah, and it doesn't really rain much in the summer until we get our monsoonal rains, which happen usually in around the third week of July, and they can last up until September. We use drip irrigation because here you can't really use overhead water. It just evaporates before it hits the ground sometimes. Sometimes the plants will go a couple months before they even feel a drop of rain or water on their leaves. And then once that does happen, they grow before your very eyes.
Wow.
It's significant. Yeah.
You kind of grow year round there too. What do you do in the winters? Is that when you practice your art mostly, or how do you really kind of find time for your art, your quilting, the farm, and other personal projects?
It's just like a fluctuation. It's like when I'm doing one of those things, I'm not doing the other things. It's like I can only be good at one thing at a time is kind of how it works. If I'm focusing on the farm, then I don't know, maybe a good dinner will be cooked that night, but I won't make it into the studio and vice versa. Yeah, so it's just like a total juggling, balancing act. But I spend the summers totally working on the farm. And then when it gets really too hot in the afternoon to be out in the field, I go back to my dye studio, which is on the back porch of my studio. And I try to make all the dyed fabric I need for the year to make quilts from on those summer afternoons. Yeah, in the wintertime, I spend that homeschooling and any chance I get. I try to force myself to get out to the studio every day for even if just an hour or a few is what I would prefer. But that's when I get most of the sewing done, the making the quilts and stuff. So it's all pretty seasonal, I guess.
When did you start your journey into natural dyeing, sewing, and quilting?
So I began sewing when my first son was born. I was pretty young when he was born. I was 23. I don't know, I had been farming for those 3 years up where he was born. And so I was used to being out at the farm and working there, but it was hard to have him out there as a newborn. And so I kind of had to let that go for a while, and I needed something to do. And my friend talked me into buying a sewing machine, and I had never sewn anything in my life, but she was like, if you can knit, you can sew. And so I just bought the machine, and I bought a couple sewing patterns and taught myself how to sew by following the sewing patterns. And all of a sudden I was making clothes for him and making clothes for me. And that's how I got into sewing. And then when he was in preschool, when he was 3, he went to a little Waldorf preschool that my best friend started. And she had a workshop there one time. And it was on needle felting or something. But the teacher had this huge contractor's bag full of plant dyed wool roving, and she turned that bag upside down and dumped it on the floor, and out came this rainbow of magic colors. And I was just totally enamored by it. I had never even thought about plant dyes or anything like that before. And it was such a profound moment that I was like, I have to figure out how to do this. And she actually sold a book on natural dyeing, and I bought it and brought it home with me. And started dyeing things in the kitchen, like dyeing things with cabbage and with anything I could experiment with, and, kept with it over the years and learned which dyes were the better ones. And just, I kind of went on and off with it over the years. When we moved here at the farm, we got sheep eventually, and then I got back into natural dyeing and knitting the kids' sweaters and naturally dyeing them and stuff. But it wasn't until maybe 2015 that I got into quilt making, right around maybe 2014. I made a quilt from the scrap basket I had of all the fabrics from all the clothes I had made the kids over the years. And I was at the craft store and saw this book on quilting, and I was like, that's what I'm going to do. I have to tackle this scrap basket. And I made a quilt from it, and that was that. I was just like hooked on quilting from going forward. I kind of stopped making as many clothes and got more into quilting.
They're like the ultimate keepsake, especially if it's with all of these pieces of other clothes and things. My grandmother made this quilt that was like all of the childhood clothes of my father, and it becomes an heirloom.
That's how I felt too. And just being able to kind of turn sewing into an art. Not that garment sewing isn't, it totally is, but I don't know, I felt like I could express myself through quilts in ways that were new to me. I was super excited about that.
This season of the Urban Exodus podcast is brought to you by Jake.art. Bring the beauty of the outdoors in. A new online art shop brought to you by Urban Exodus. Search our collection of affordable, high-quality fine art prints and illustrations by color or theme to find just the right work for your home or office. Or commission us to do a custom illustration or photograph of a loved one. Visit Jake.art, that's JAKE.ART, or click the shop button on urbanexodus.com.
It's really wonderful to hear that you haven't been sewing, honestly, for that long. I mean, about 20 years you've been sewing, and
21 now. That's how I gauge it, my son.
So anybody can start up at any point in time. It's not like out of the realm of possibility for them. I feel like a lot of people, like, they look at things and they go, oh, I could never do that. But
no, there's so many ways to do it now too. I mean, when I did it, I feel like if I could do it, anybody could do it. Because I just learned by sewing those like McCall's and Simplicity patterns, which are actually like hard patterns to follow. I don't even use those anymore because there's so many better patterns now from independent designers. And then there's the YouTube now, which is like, the best thing for people wanting to learn things.
Absolutely.
Just look it up and there's a video.
What are your favorite natural materials to dye with?
Pretty much only dye with, as far as fibers, I use organic cotton, and I found an organic linen that I really like, and then I found a mix of the two, a cotton linen, and that I really like that because they take the dyes a little differently. The linen seems to take the dye stronger. I get better colors on linen usually. But I really like that blend. And it must be like a warp and weft of cotton and linen, because when you dye on it, you get this texture from the ways that the two fabrics take the dyes. And that's in commercial dyeing, they would probably call that yarn dye. It's just those little subtleties I like that makes it kind of stand out in a way that you don't see in commercial pieces. And then as far as plants, there's so many that I like. I took an indigo workshop last year, and I'm starting to get more into indigo because I understand it better now. And I love working with madder root. We grow that here. I love working with the onion skins that we grow, and the elm leaves from the elm trees here make a really nice brown. I grow Hopi sunflowers, and that makes my favorite brown. That one is so beautiful. And yeah, I don't know. I love trying all different kinds of things. I buy a lot of plants from dye supply places too, to get, colors that I couldn't get from the things that I grow. Yeah, there's not many colors that I don't like. Occasionally I'll get one that I'm not happy with, but I'll try to over dye it or fix it in some way.
When you start a new project, what is your creative process like to get a quilt from ideation to completion?
It just really depends. Like sometimes I'll go into the dye season like with a plan. Like last year I wanted to create a bunch of just neutral colors, like really light, barely dyed, like beiges and really light shades of brown to work with. So sometimes I'll have a plan or even a specific quilt that I have in mind, and I'll dye the colors that I want for that project. But a lot of times I just spend the summer making colors, color after color. I'm working with one color or one dye pot for like a whole week and trying to extract as much out of it as I can. And then I just have these drawers in my studio, and I'll just fill them up with colors as the summer goes by. And then when the winter comes, I open the drawers and kind of see what I have and put different colors together to form palettes and see. I don't know. Usually that's how it goes, is just coming up with a palette and then thinking what kind of design would work with this. And it also depends on how much I have to work with. So there's all kinds of different aspects of it. But yeah, most of the time it's random.
What hopes do you have for the future of textiles and clothing production in the U.S.?
I hope that we can come up with a better way, like that mostly that people would feel like they need less or want less, because these companies are going to keep making this stuff if people are going to keep buying it. It's such a toxic industry. It's all the dyes and, the natural fibers. And I hope people just want to consume less, really.
Yeah. Ultimately, consumers drive the market, right? So we actually do have a lot of power in making those changes. I saw this photograph of a pair of skinny jeans breaking down outside, and it was just so horrifying to see just like one pair of skinny jeans, that they never go away.
I know. Right.
Are there any misperceptions about rural communities and rural living that you would like to dispel?
We can romanticize country living. It's such a beautiful thing for people who want to do it, like it can be. And we all, like myself included, like we put pictures up on Instagram and our blogs and stuff. And I think in those pictures and stuff, we really only see like the final product, like what we've worked up to get it to this place. And maybe you don't really see all the work that went into it to get it to that place. Yeah. It's just a lot of work to live in the country, even if you're not farming, like even if you just have to like take care of 3 acres that isn't a farm, it's a lot of work. So I don't know.
Just kind of the overly bucolic vision of living. It's much harder work, but it feels like much more rewarding work.
I don't know. You can also get really sucked into never leaving the farm.
Yeah.
Which is, I don't know. We have to force ourselves sometimes to, there's times in the summer where we'll just work for weeks on end without taking a day off. And it's hard. We do it because we love it. But it's hard to get yourself to stop sometimes. I think it's harder for some people than for others, for sure. But yeah, get yourself to stop if you can. Take a day off, get up into the mountains or go for a hike. Because when you do peel yourself away, it's like, oh yeah, this is This is better.
This is why I'm doing this. Yeah, that's such good advice. I feel like it can be so hard for, maybe it's just certain personality types, but I do think it's a reoccurring theme that I've noticed through the project is you get so set on trying to build this life that's sustainable, that works in the country. And that requires a lot of time and energy. And it's hard to like take a moment to take a step back, take a breather, and like really go, wow, look at what we've built. And now I'm going to actually enjoy, take a moment to enjoy this life. And yeah,
it's hard. But for us, it's like once we take that one, for us, it's always hiking. Like that's what gets us off the farm, getting up into the high country. But it only takes that one time. And then it's like, oh yeah, this is where we need to be too. And then we get up there more, at least once a week. But it's always hard to get to that first one that inspires the others.
That is how I have stayed sane during the pandemic, is just once a week. Our daughter goes and hangs out with her grandma, which so lucky and grateful to have grandparents nearby. But then I go for a hike and it just resets everything.
It really does. It's like it totally shifts the mind.
I really appreciate that you use your social media to showcase your art and your farm life, but you've made it really clear that you aren't there for selling things. And I wonder if you'd speak a little bit about the positives and negatives of social media in your life and the steps you've taken to establish clear and healthy boundaries.
Yeah, so I'd say the positives outweigh the negatives, even though I go back and forth with it sometimes, but it's just such an amazing platform for artists and creative people. Because like when my boys were really little, I would make all these Waldorf kind of crafts and do all this sewing and stuff. And I would sell it on eBay because that was really the only platform that was available then. It was before Etsy existed or before I knew about it. And so now I can look at Instagram as like such an amazing platform, such an amazing opportunity for creative people to get your work out there and like inspire and be inspired by so many other people doing similar things. So that's like the positive part. The negative part, of course, is just like you can spend way too much time on there, and I don't know all the negative parts about it. But I don't know. I try not to. I guess I am there to sell is the thing. Like I'm there to like put my work out there as an artist, and even as a farmer, like, oh, we just loaded up the farm stand, come down and get it. And then it's, then people come and it's gone. So I am there to sell things, but I'm not there to sell like toasters and I don't know. I get a lot of people commenting and asking where I got this and where I got that. Yeah, I'm not there for that. And that was the boundary that I did have to come to terms with. But I am there to sell quilts and find those kind of opportunities. So.
Yeah. And honestly, it's been such an amazing tool for so many people who are based in rural areas where they wouldn't maybe have that same network that you would have in the city or access to stores to sell your wares. So you can really be much more independent.
Yeah. And I think it's like, I don't know, for some people that is a good opportunity too, like to get that income from doing that. For me, I'm just like, when I do that, when I tell sources of things in my pictures, it's just not what I'm there for because I'm not getting compensated from companies. And it is work. It's like answering all those questions. And I don't know, it's just like I could do that if I wanted to. And if I did do that, I would do it in a way that I was getting paid. But I really just want to spend my time on the internet, just like doing what I'm there for, which is like promoting myself as an artist and stuff like that. I just don't have the time to do the other stuff.
This episode is brought to you by the workshops at Howe Hill Farm, a new photography and creative workshop series brought to you by Urban Exodus. Workshops are hosted online and at our farm headquarters in Midcoast, Maine. The workshops at Howe Hill Farm offer learning experiences that encourage you to experiment with new techniques, hone your creative vision, and advance your professional opportunities. Check out Howe Hill Farm's full lineup of online and in-person offerings by visiting the workshops page on urbanexodus.com. Stay up to date on courses and happenings on the farm by following at Howe Hill Farm. That's HOWEHILLFARM on Instagram.
I know that environmental and social activism is deep at the core of everything that you do. Can you talk about the steps that you've taken to lead a conscious life, both on a personal and business level?
For us, it was when we got into farming, it wasn't like because we wanted to be environmentally conscious. Maybe it was, but it's not like it wasn't our drive, but it was definitely a great thing, a great part of it. Organic farming is just like, I don't know, like it's a good thing. We're not being huge polluters or anything.
I think your story is so interesting because although it was by chance, it was kind of like you were searching for something. You went to a couple of different schools, but then when you got to Durango, you found what you were looking for and settled into it and planted those roots. And I think a lot of people do feel like they're searching for something, but maybe they are nervous to try to step out of those comfort zones to find out what it is that they're looking for.
Yeah. I think for me, it was like I got really far away from where I came from, where I grew up. And just being that far away helped me kind of be able to find myself and start making choices about my life, which were my choices and not influenced by family or what other people wanted for me. I think that was a big part of it for me.
So you grew up in suburban Detroit. What connection do you have to your family now? How do they view this life that you've built? Was it challenging initially for them to understand, or?
Yeah, it definitely was, because I mean, when I called them and told them that I was going to quit school, and it was hard, and they weren't very, I wouldn't say they were very accepting of it at that time. And then, I mean, it all happened so fast, and I was so young. I was like 20 years old when that happened. But yeah, I think just, I didn't want to go to college. It was something that they wanted for me. And, looking back, it's like it was such a privilege that they were willing to help me do that. But it wasn't something that I wanted for myself. And I just knew that, but I didn't know what I wanted for myself. So I was just lucky in the way it all panned out, I guess.
What advice do you have for other, young farmers who are maybe just getting into it on ways to try and help set themselves up for success to build like a real viable small scale farm business?
Take on an apprenticeship, like do an apprenticeship with a farm that's doing really good and just learn that way. I think learning to farm, I know some people who that's how they learned farming, and it seems like that was really great for them. But maybe just ask around, ask a lot of questions and read a lot of books. And we've just been lucky in the way it all worked out for us. We worked really, really hard for it all because we had to, we didn't have a plan B, or we didn't have financial help from families or anything. We really just had to make it happen. And it was mostly through hard work. And it wasn't always we're not like great business people by any means. We never had a plan for the farm. We just grow a whole bunch of vegetables. And we definitely plant every week or every 2 weeks or whatever. My husband's in charge of it. He was in charge of all that. But yeah, it was we never had a business plan or really anything. I don't know. So I'm probably a terrible person to ask.
Is it just the two of you that run the farm now, or do you have help on the farm?
It's just us now. When we first started, we were at the first farm for the 7 years. We had 2 other partners, and then one moved away, and then the other one moved up to Denver. And yeah, so then it just was us. And then we bought this place, and it's always been just us. We brought in help on Fridays for the market harvest. But now we just run our farm stand. It's right here on the farm. And we don't hire anyone anymore. The kids are here with us, and they are our helpers.
Do you have 4 children? Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
How did you balance being a farmer and raising kids too? Because I think that that's something that a lot of young farmers struggle with, especially with their first, even just wanting to have kids, but being worried about whether they can do it.
Mm-hmm. I know I get that question a lot, and I don't really know. It was crazy. It was crazy times. Like when we bought this place, and the kids were 1, 3, and 5, and we had to start this farm. We closed on April 14th of 2005, and like I said, he was out in the field breaking ground as soon as we got that key in our hand. So it was absolutely crazy. We like moved all the furniture into the garage and like never really unpacked until fall. So those are days that would never want to go back to. It was just like so hard,
just
so
getting
stressful,
through.
And stressful in every way, like financially, and like it was really, really hard. But yeah, I don't know. My kids were really free range, I guess you could say. Like they ran around the farm like naked a lot of the times, and not in a neglected way, but they definitely had freedom. Like I wasn't hovering over them all the time, but not because I didn't want to, but just because I couldn't. They were in the kitchen, like making sandwiches and eventually like cooking for themselves pretty early while I was like having to do stuff on the farm. And it led to them being really independent.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I don't know. It was hard, and that's definitely like not a way that a lot of people would choose, but it wasn't really a choice for us. It was just the way that it had to be.
Well, the kids that I've met through this project, most are kind of in a very similar situation. It's like it's all hands on deck, and it allows for this level of freedom and exploration and imagination that maybe I certainly had as a kid, because I kind of grew up in the country of one of 4 kids, where it's just like my mom would ring a bell and we'd have to like come running from the woods to come get dinner, and I learned how to cook my own meals probably when I was like 6 or something. And
that's how my kids were. Like they could definitely fry an egg when they were 6.
Yeah, it makes such like an independent and strong adult too. And it's not any looking down on this at all, but there's a level of kind of coddling that we do with kids now in our society that's like generally what people expect. And I think kids can do so much more than what we think that they can do. And especially if there just aren't any other options, right?
Yeah, for me. And it was something I struggled with. Like I wanted to be able to, I don't know, just like coddle them more. And I would feel bad about it sometimes, but it worked out. They love us still. They learned to be hard workers out of it. And they helped a lot when they were kids. Like we weren't like forcing them to do child labor or anything, but when they saw us working hard like that, and they did step in voluntarily and just like help when help was needed. So they're all really, really good workers. Yeah, for sure.
What legacy do you want to leave behind for your kids and for future generations?
I want everyone in the world or in the country to be able to have those options to make decisions based on happiness too. So to try to take part in creating a world or a society where people have the choices that we've been able to have based on happiness,
2020 was a really hard year on so many levels, and 2021 doesn't feel any easier, quite honestly. What has this difficult time taught you, and how are you carrying that into your work and your processes for 2021?
It's just taught me to appreciate the life that we have. And for us, 2020 wasn't, this is such a privilege, but it wasn't that much different for us. But watching other people struggle and going through all the horrible parts of 2020, that it was terrible. But for us, like being here on the farm, like when the lockdown happened, it really wasn't like we were just going into the busiest part of the time on the farm, getting everything started and going. And so for us to have to be home, it wasn't a thing, but to see the collective struggle is really, really hard, to see all the suffering and the challenges and the brokenness of the system. And it's disheartening.
Yeah, it's like the curtain's been pulled back on everything that's wrong in our society.
Yeah, it has. And
ignore it.
It's always been there. And I'm just glad that so many of us woke up to it. Like, that's the first step, is just like being aware and acknowledging it. Like, but gosh, what a long way we have to go.
Yeah. 2020 also inspired a lot of people to leave cities or to change their lifestyles. Have you noticed an influx of new people in your community?
I've heard that. We honestly don't get out much. We stay. So I've heard that. I have a friend who's a realtor, and he said that there's just like nothing, no inventory right now. So yeah, I think that there's a huge influx. I know that Tommy was at Home Depot yesterday, and he said all the wood and lumber and stuff is like 4 times more than it was last year. And so, yeah, there's definitely a huge influx of people leaving and coming here and to other places as well.
We have the same thing with lumber where we are too. There's so many new houses going up and renovations happening to houses that have been abandoned for so many years. It's really interesting. Do you have any advice for new rural transplants on how to form community and build a rewarding life in the country?
Take it slow, I guess. Like, if you're going to move to, at least for us, like when we moved here, the property and the house needed so much work. Just take your time, especially on the land, like making decisions about what to do with the land. Like, do a lot of research and take your time before just rushing into making decisions, so that you don't regret doing things wrong. Although that's a fine way to learn too, I guess. Yeah, just if you live in the West, try to get along with the neighbors about water. That's like a huge thing that we face out here. Is every year when the ditch turns on in the spring, there's always like some sort of water dispute. It's like the Milagro Beanfield War. I don't know if you've read that book or seen it, but it's for real. I mean, the water disputes are crazy. So just, I don't know.
Are you noticing the effects of climate change in your area? You've been there now for a period of time where you could have really seen that progress. Are you starting to notice effects?
At least when we first lived here, like the first 7 years, it was more temperate. The monsoonal rains were more reliable, where it was like clockwork. Like by the 3rd week of July, the monsoons would come and they would be strong, and they would be like every Friday for sure, because that was the day we had to be out in the field harvesting. And they would be kind of torrential, like monsoons are, and in the last 8 years, probably, we just haven't been getting them like that. They just don't. There's been even a couple of summers where it's rained, like 4 times or something. So we're just not getting the rain. We're not getting the snow that we used to get. I mean, when the kids were little, it would snow like 4 feet sometimes. And we barely even get snow here where we are now. I don't know if that's climate change or if we're just in a drought, or I don't know. It's hard to say. It's probably climate change.
Have you ever considered relocating in the future if water access becomes a real issue? Is that something that you've thought about or looked into?
We travel a lot. That's one thing we do in the winter. And not really. Like, we always, when we travel and we come back here, we're always like so happy to be home. And we love living here. And even though it is really difficult to farm here, there are parts about farming here that are great. Like, if you have irrigation water, it's sunny here like every day. So you plant the seeds and you water them with your drip irrigation. And as long as you have water and sun, it's pretty good. So, and even though the temperature fluctuations are hard to deal with, there are parts about farming here that aren't so bad. So yeah, no, there's just not really any place we can think of that we'd rather be, I guess. We like it here.
How can people learn more about you, see your work, see your quilts that you design? What are some ways that people can follow your journey there?
My Instagram, Farm and Folk, and then my website is farmandfolk.com.
Well, Sara, thank you so much. I really appreciate all of the work that you are doing and putting out into the world. And I think you inspire a lot of people to kind of make, whether you know it or not, to make little changes in their life towards happiness, like what you were saying. And sometimes those can be really, really small things. So I really appreciate you sharing those elements of your life and all of the knowledge that you share too. You share a lot of information on your website on ways to naturally dye and sew things. And so if people go there to check those out, because you share a lot of how people can implement this in their own life. So thank you for that work.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Sara Buscaglia. I'm so inspired by Sara's artist journey. Learning to sew as a young mom, it's incredible to see what she now constructs in her studio. It reminds me that it's never too late to learn a craft or to hone your artistic practice. If art calls to you and brings you joy, make time for it. Creativity is a muscle, and it only gets stronger with constant exercise. Explore new techniques and don't be afraid to fail. Failing is just a way of getting better. Follow your instincts and don't get stuck or discouraged by comparing yourself to others. Everyone has something unique to offer. You can tap into your own distinct voice by working at it. You can find a link to Sara's website with pictures of her beautiful creations by visiting urbanexodus.com.
Hi, friends. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Urban Exodus podcast. Urban Exodus is a labor of love, and it's only made possible by your generous support. Maybe you just discovered Urban Exodus, or maybe you followed the project for a long time. Either way, please consider supporting my efforts so I can keep this going. The first and easiest way is to click the support button at the top of urbanexodus.com and pledge any amount you like. Second, sponsor an episode of the podcast as a business or individual and get a 20-second ad spot in an upcoming episode. Just click the podcast link on urbanexodus.com to learn more. Third, you can sign up for an in-person or online workshop with me or one of the incredible creative professionals through our workshops at Howe Farm. Click the workshops page on urbanexodus.com to learn more. Fourth, you can buy something from Jake.art, our new Urban Exodus online shop. A fine art print or wall art for your home or office. A custom illustration or portrait of your family or loved one. There are so many cool things. Just click the shop page to peruse what's available. Lastly, you can hire me to photograph your business or family, or take one of my online or destination workshops. Click the collaborations page on urbanexodus.com to learn more. Another really excellent way to support is to recommend Urban Exodus to your friends and relations. Also by giving a 5-star ratings on iTunes to beat the algorithm and so that we can be more easily searchable. Your continued support will keep this passion project running. I want anyone who feels unfulfilled by career or circumstance to know that they have options and alternatives. All of the work that I do through this project is to encourage people to believe in themselves and to work towards a better future for their community and the planet. Thank you for helping me continue to do this work. You can find Urban Exodus on Instagram and Facebook at The Urban Exodus. To read more in-depth features on folks who ditched the city and went country, visit urbanexodus.com. Until next time, I'm Melissa Hessler, and this is The Urban Exodus.